The second part of this week will be a discussion around conifers and other gymnosperms. The term conifer means cone-bearing or cone-bearing tree. Gymnosperm means naked seed. Let's briefly talk about vascular versus non-vascular plants. A vascular plant is the angiosperm. This is the normal seeded plant with vascular channels that are separated into xylem and phloem, as we've talked about in the past. Vascular plants have a large number of vascular plants have seeds. These are either gymnosperms or angiosperms. And then there are also the non-seeded vascular plants, which are ferns and mosses. Non-vascular plants do not have the vascular channels that we find in the vascular plants, and these include other mosses as well as liverworts. Gymnosperm is a term that means naked seed, as I said before, and the seed is produced, but it is not covered by the walls of an ovary as it is in an angiosperm. Conifers are cone-producing gymnosperms and include an extensive array of trees, including the pine, the spruce, the fir tree, cedar, cypress, hemlock, larch, and redwood. Staminate cones, as you might have guessed, since we've talked about staminate flowers before, are cones that produce pollen, whereas ovulate cones are cones that produce seeds. Some notable conifers include the Douglas fir, which is one of the largest trees, and the giant sequoia, which is one of the oldest living beings. These are literally thousands of years old. And then there's also the Briscone pine, which is shown in this picture on the right. The coastal redwood is known for its tremendous height, and then there are the pine trees that we are familiar with throughout the southeast. The spruce tree is distinct from the pine tree in the types of needles and cones that they produce. This picture on the right here is what's known as a bunya bunya. There's also the curry plant and a Woolmy pine tree, and these are all various forms of cone-producing trees that have the naked seeds within them. Then the unusual gymnosperms include the cyad and the ginkgo. The picture on the right again is a ginkgo tree. A ginkgo tree is actually native to Asia, but one of the things that's interesting about the ginkgo tree is the colored leaves which fall each fall. These are part of a group known as gonidophytes. Now let's move on and talk about vascular spore-producing plants. These would be plants that do not produce seeds, but reproduce by other means. And the main one of these is the ferns. A fern is a non-flowering vascular plant that does not reproduce using seeds, but reproduces using spores. Spores are one-celled reproductive structures that produce another plant. In the fern, the big leaves that you see when you have a fern are known as fronds that grow from the stem, and the stem grows along the ground, and then the frond comes up from the stem. A fiddlehead, which is pictured here on the right, is simply a frond that has not unfolded as yet and is still developing. Now ferns have small brown spots on their leaves. You see again in the picture on the right, and these small brown spots are actually spore casings. And the spore case, which is also called the sporangia, is where the spores are produced and then released. And this is a picture that shows the various aspects of the fern. First you have the roots and then a horizontal underground stem known as a rhizome. Out of this horizontal underground stem come the various fronds that are pictured here. Then if you get a close-up of one of these frond leaves, you see the sori being these brown spots, and then inside each of these sori are the sporangium. The sporangium contains the spores. The sporangium opens up and the spores are released. Now, ferns reproduce according to something known as an alternation of generations. Alternations of generations are when a plant or animal has a life cycle that has both a sexual and an asexual phase. The sporophyte is the asexual phase of the fern life cycle, and spores are produced that produce the gametophyte. The gametophyte is the sexual phase of the fern life cycle. When those two unite, then you form another sporophyte. And this picture is a summary of that. We'll start at the top here, and at the top we have the stem or rhizome with the roots coming down off of that. Out of the stem come the various fronds, and here's a fiddlehead and another fiddlehead. And the fern here is this is the mature sporophyte fern. Then underneath the leaves you see the sori on the underside of this, and this shows a sorus here. And then inside the sorus is the sporangium. The sporangium releases the spores. The spores hit the ground. When the spores hit the ground, they form something called a prothallus. The prothallus is the gametophyte form of the fern. And when you look at a fern, you'll see all the leaves of the sporophyte, and you have to look pretty carefully to see the actual prothallus, because it's not very big and it's not as dramatic as the sporophyte form. And then you have two areas of the prothallus. One's called the archegonium, which produces the egg, and the antherium, which produces the sperm. These unite and produce an embryo. Then out of the prothallus, the new sporophyte comes forth and eventually comes back, and then we repeat. So you have two distinct, one sexual and one asexual form of life. The whole life cycle is encompassed by these two together. And this is called alternation of generations. Another vascular plant that does not have seeds is called a club moss. Club moss is a creeping vascular plant with erect stems bearing a club-shaped cone. And again, you can see that over here on the right. These are also called ground pines, and they grow along the ground in temperate regions, and they essentially resemble miniature pine trees, which is why they're called ground pines. Now, a club moss with horizontal stems that trail along the ground is called a lycopodium. And that's not this picture here. And so lycopodium is a subgroup of the club moss. The large club that comes out of the lycopodium is called a strobili, and it is a sporangia, and it has a tip where the spores come out from the sporangia. Another vascular plant that doesn't produce seeds is a horsetail. Horsetails are vascular plants with the hollow jointed stems and very small leaves. This is a picture of a horsetail over here on the right. The interesting thing about a horsetail is that there is silica embedded in the epidermis of the plant, the epidermis being the outer skin, and this silica gives it a rough sort of texture. And because of that, these are called scouring rushes. And a scouring rush is a bunch of horsetails tied together, and then these are used to scour pots and pans and various other things.